On June 18, 2020, one of Germany's 40 most valuable public companies made a small announcement. Its auditors could not locate 1.9 billion euros. Not misplaced in the accounts, not tied up in bad investments. Missing. Roughly a quarter of the company's entire balance sheet, supposedly sitting in 2 banks in the Philippines, held safe for years, earning interest, audited and signed off. And when someone finally checked, the banks said the documents proving it were forgeries. Paperwork theater. A quarter of a blue-chip company made of paper. Within a week, the company was insolvent. Its chief executive, the billionaire prophet of cashless Europe, was in handcuffs in Munich. And its chief operating officer, the man who personally ran the business, where the missing billions supposedly lived, had boarded a plane, told colleagues he was off to prove the money existed, and disappeared off the face of the earth. He has not been seen in public since. The strange part isn't that the money vanished. The strange part is that the money may never have existed at all, that the profits it supposedly came from may never have existed, and that for 5 years the people who kept saying so, journalists, short sellers, whistleblowers, were investigated, sued, and smeared. Not by the company, by Germany. By the end of this video, you'll understand the machine. The third-party partners that generated profits no auditor ever touched. The escrow accounts that existed on letterhead only, and the regulator that responded to fraud warnings by investigating the journalists. Everything here comes from the insolvency record, the KPMG special audit, the bank's own statements, and the Munich charges. This is vanished billions. Open the file. Wirecard began outside Munich in 1999, processing payments for the corners of the internet respectable banks avoided, gambling sites, adult content. It was a real business with real servers and real fees. But when you're the company that handles the money nobody else will touch, growth comes easy and questions come rarely. That culture, keep the money moving, don't ask where from, was there from the beginning. Under CEO Markus Braun, a soft-spoken Austrian with a black turtleneck and a doctorate, who quoted artificial intelligence and the cashless future like a prophet reading scripture, Wirecard rebranded as Europe's answer to PayPal. Payments, a banking license, cards, apps, everything money would ever become. Braun was Wirecard's largest shareholder and its true believer-in-chief. Revenue seemed to compound magically, 20–30% a year, driven by mysterious third-party acquirers in Dubai, Singapore, and Manila. Partner companies that processed card transactions in markets where Wirecard had no license of its own and sent back reports of astonishing profits. Wirecard booked the profits. The partners kept the details. For years, that arrangement struck remarkably few people as strange. The numbers kept climbing, 20–30% a year, every year through every market cycle. In 2018, Wirecard hit a market value of 24 billion euros and shoved century-old Commerzbank out of the DAX, the elite index of German corporate power. In 2019, SoftBank, the biggest tech investor on earth, put in 900 million. Every new believer made doubting look more foolish. Germany, a nation embarrassed to have missed the internet economy, finally had its tech champion. Remember that national pride. It is a load-bearing part of this story. One detail never quite fit the story. For a 24 billion euro global technology giant, headquarters was not a glass tower in Frankfurt. It was a plain office block in Aschheim, a quiet Munich suburb, across from a supermarket. Visitors described hallways that felt half empty. The market saw a lean disruptor. In hindsight, there may simply not have been that much company to house. Strip away the fintech branding and look at the machinery. The alleged machine, as reconstructed by auditors, prosecutors, and the insolvency administrator, had 3 parts, each one ordinary on its own. Together, a fortress no auditor ever breached. Part 1. The untouchable profits. Roughly half of Wirecard's revenue, and prosecutors allege essentially all of its real profit on paper, flowed through 3 third-party partners in Asia. Not through Wirecard's own systems, where auditors could trace every transaction. Through outside companies in other jurisdictions whose numbers arrived as summaries. The healthy half of Wirecard was a mask worn by the phantom half. Some of those mighty partners operated out of remarkably unglamorous places. Reporters who went looking found modest offices and, in one now famous case, a partner address that traced to a family home with a garden trampoline out back. On paper, entities like these were generating the profits of a global financial powerhouse. The profits existed as entries reported about the partners, not as transactions anyone could inspect, audit, or touch. And where real money was needed, investigators described a simpler trick with an old name: round tripping. Money leaves the company, travels through partners and accounts abroad, and comes back dressed as customer revenue. The same euros, counted again and again. Real cash making phantom sales look alive. Part 2, the phantom escrow. All that partner profit, eventually 1.9 billion euros of it, had to live somewhere. It was said to sit in escrow accounts at 2 banks in the Philippines, watched over by a trustee, a single intermediary through whom every confirmation, every bank letter, every balance statement conveniently flowed. For years, the auditors accepted the paperwork that came through that one channel. When auditors finally demanded independent confirmation in 2020, both banks replied that the documents were fake. One noted the paperwork used the wrong letterhead. The accounts, they said, simply did not exist and never had. The trustee who supposedly safeguarded 2 billion euros had, in the words that ended the company, attempted to deceive. 19 years of audits had never once included a direct call to those banks. Part 3, the shield of respectability, a DAX listing. A Big Four auditor signing off year after year for a decade, and the part that makes this file unique among all our cases, a national regulator that, when the Financial Times published evidence of accounting fraud in 2019, did something unprecedented. It banned short selling of Wirecard stock, the first single stock ban in German history, and filed a criminal complaint against the journalists who wrote the story. The watchdog guarded the henhouse door. From the outside, it remains one of the strangest sentences in the history of financial regulation. The pressure came almost entirely from outside Germany. Short sellers circulated the anonymous Zatara report in 2016. And from 2015, the Financial Times journalist Dan McCrum published the House of Wirecard series. Whistleblower documents from the Singapore office, forged contracts, round-tripped money, the same euros circling through partners to look like revenue. Wirecard called it all market manipulation, a conspiracy of speculators. Much of the German press ran with the company's version, and the story became about the messengers. McCrum ended up investigated by German authorities, while prosecutors now allege the fraud ran on. There were warnings with sirens attached. In February 2019, police raided Wirecard's Singapore office after an internal whistleblower alleged forged contracts and money flows built to deceive. The stock shook and recovered. The believers held. The regulator, days later, was banning the short sellers. In late 2019, cornered by the reporting, Wirecard commissioned its own special audit from KPMG to clear its name once and for all. Instead, in April 2020, KPMG delivered the opposite. It could not verify that the third-party revenues, years of them, billions of them, existed at all. Documents arrived late, or altered, or not at all. Meetings were canceled. For months, the trustee blocked every attempt to simply look at the escrow cash. There is only one reason to stop an auditor from looking at your money. June 16th, the Philippine banks disowned the confirmations, forged. June 18th, the auditors refused to sign. June 19th, Braun resigns. June 22nd, Braun is arrested and the company admits the 1.9 billion likely does not exist. June 25th, Wirecard files for insolvency, the first company in the history of the DAX, the index of German industrial giants, to collapse straight out of it. 24 billion euros of market value at the peak gone. 6,000 employees discovering their company was, in large part, a story. And every institution that had certified it, an auditor, a regulator, an index committee, left holding the pen. And Jan Marsalek, the chief operating officer who personally ran the third-party business, told colleagues he was flying to Manila to prove the money existed. Philippine immigration records showing his arrival were fake. Investigators traced his actual route, a private jet to Minsk. He has been a fugitive ever since, charged in Germany on Interpol's lists. And according to reporting by the Financial Times, Der Spiegel and others, investigators allege he had long-standing links to Russian intelligence. Where the money's keeper went is officially an open question. Reporting by the Financial Times, Der Spiegel and others has traced him to Moscow, living, investigators allege, under the protection of Russian services, Germany's most wanted white-collar fugitive, and the one man who could answer the only question that matters. Was there ever any money at all? The ledger on this one is short and brutal. The 1.9 billion never found. The banks say it was never there, and the administrator found no trace of it anywhere on Earth. What was real? More than 3 billion euros of very real debt, borrowed from banks and bondholders on the strength of profits that prosecutors allege did not exist. Money that flowed in real euros, some of it, investigators say, out through unsecured loans to the same opaque partners in Asia and simply never came back. Shareholders lost effectively everything, including German pension savers who had bought the national champion, sold to them as the future. The insolvency administrator recovered fractions by selling the actual businesses, which, stripped of the phantom half, turned out to be modest and mostly unprofitable. The aftermath consumed institutions too. The auditors faced lawsuits and restrictions. The head of the regulator departed. A parliamentary inquiry asked, in essence, how an entire country's defenses had pointed the wrong way. The reckoning reached the institutions too. The auditors who signed for a decade faced lawsuits and sanctions and a bruised name. The president of the financial regulator stepped down. A parliamentary inquiry spent a year asking one question in 100 forms. How did every defense mechanism of a serious country end up pointed at the people telling the truth? Set this beside the other files, and the shape repeats with a German accent. FTX had a token that made the balance sheet look solvent. Theranos had a demo that could not fail. Wirecard, prosecutors allege, had profits that could not be audited, parked precisely where no auditor could reach them, behind a trustee, an ocean, and a wall of national pride so effective that the state attacked the auditors of last resort, the press. Verification itself was the thing being counterfeited. It always is. Markus Braun denies all wrongdoing. His trial in Munich, years long, among the longest fraud proceedings in German history, grinds on. Jan Marsalek remains a ghost with an Interpol notice. Dan McCrum, the reporter Germany investigated, watched the story he was punished for telling become the official record. In this entire file, the only institution that did its job from beginning to end was a newspaper. New forensic files every Tuesday and Friday. The frauds, collapses, and cons the business world would rather forget. Subscribe if you want to know where the money went.